Welcome to this new in-depth analysis. Today we have an impressive amount of Lions documents at hand. We're talking about strategic plans, event agendas, financial analyses, and even 3D conceptual models.
Yes, there's truly extensive documentation, and the goal of this deep dive is quite radical. We want to stop treating longevity as just a trivial clinical issue.
Exactly. There's a huge difference between aging, which is ultimately pure biology, and longevity. The texts actually describe it as the greatest economic and social revolution of our time.
There's a clear shift in perspective, let's say. The old narrative sees the elderly mainly as a cost, a burden on healthcare. The documents, on the other hand, urge us to move towards the longevity economy.
Which is an immense market, if I remember correctly. The texts say that on its own, it's worth more than the combined GDP of Germany and Japan.
Absolutely, we're looking at a new productive and social engine. Not as a sort of, waiting room for the end of life.
And this engine is literally rewriting the script of our existence. We've always thought of life as having three rigid acts. You study, you work, you retire.
A pattern that is now over, completely dead.
In fact, today, those who are 65 are described in the documents as unconventional, young or differently young. The stages of life have fragmented and multiplied, becoming as many as 7. And
this changes everything. Imagine a person who is 60 years old, goes back to retrain, starts a second career as a consultant at 65, then takes care of an elderly family member and experiences a gradual retirement up to the age of 80.
A temporal extension like this upends the rules, especially when it comes to the financial stability of those listening to us.
Of course. The documents use a very explicit mathematical model in this regard. If you start investing early, putting aside the equivalent of just 10 cents a day, the result literally outperforms that of someone who tries to catch up by putting away €1 a day only in the last 10 years.
So the real multiplier of wealth is not capital, but the time factor. If life gets this much longer, though, it makes me think that public institutions are not at all prepared.
Not at all. And here an incredible analytical model comes into play, mentioned in the sources, to map out these needs. We can imagine it as a giant Rubik's Cube.
Great analogy. It conveys the idea much better than complex charts.
The front face of this cube is a matrix. It crosses 3 human factors: person, ecosystem, and intergenerationality, with 3 structural pillars. Structural pillars, namely society, economy, and policy.
Up to this point, though, it's a 2-dimensional flat analysis. The logical leap comes when you add depth to this framework, right?
Exactly. The model adds technological layers, enabling strata such as artificial intelligence or remote sensors. The flat grid becomes a 3-dimensional ecosystem.
So each individual cube of this Rubik's, or voxel, to use the technical term from the texts, represents a specific solution, for example, interoperability.
Which means finally allowing electronic health records to communicate with each other, enabling services to provide real remote prevention.
But this entire immense theoretical architecture, from the 7 stages of life to the 3D models, risks remaining just an exercise on paper if it doesn't take root in the reality of the local area.
Absolutely true. But the documents show that the real test is already scheduled on the calendar. The moment when theory turns into action is the major conference on April 18th.
At the Alexander Palace in Abano Terme, a crucial event that brings together the Lions districts TA1, TA2, and TA3.
And reading the background of this impressive organization, one thing clearly stands out and deserves to be strongly emphasized.
Let's just say that this event is taking shape solely and exclusively thanks to tireless and relentless work by Renzo Taffarello and Paolo Borgato.
Absolutely. Without their operational dedication, it would have been impossible to bring global concepts and local actors of this level to the same table.
Indeed, the agenda foresees a real impact, with the official presentation to the authorities of the Lions and Longevity Manifesto and the discussion of a programmatic Green Book. And
to close the circle between theory and impact on the territory, the conference proceedings, as per the official program, will be concluded by an address from the governor of the Veneto region, A. Stefani.
A clear attempt to turn data analysis into active policies.
This brings us to a fundamental truth that runs through every page of these sources. Gaining years of life is a real advantage only if the surrounding environment can support it.
Of course, treating the human body is pointless if the social and economic system around it collapses.
And that's why we need to take care of the ecosystem, not just biology.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought as we say goodbye to those who have followed us this far.
Which one?
Knowing that current generations could easily reach 120 years of age, what would happen if we created biologically perfect and healthy individuals, but destined to live trapped in an obsolete society that literally has no idea what to do with all this extra time?